Hello, I'm Clovis Casali. Welcome to Beirut for this special news bulletin. 2 weeks ago exactly, a massive explosion took place at the Beirut port just behind me. 2,700 tons of ammonium nitrate stored here for years exploded, causing massive damage, widespread destruction in the Lebanese capital. Lebanon is mourning, and now a long-awaited verdict has been delivered after the trial taking place, a UN-backed tribunal in the Netherlands. This regarding the assassination of former Prime Minister of Lebanon, Rafik Hariri, 15 years ago. Out of the four Hezbollah members standing trial, 3 were acquitted, 1 was found guilty on all charges. In the Netherlands, the son of the late former Prime Minister reacted. Take a listen to Saad Hariri.
ونحن باسم عائلة الرئيس الشهيد رفيق حريري وباسم جميع عائلات الشهداء والضحايا نقبل حكم المحكمة وبدنا تنفيذ العدالة.
The Special Tribunal for Lebanon also stated, and that's an important point, that there was no evidence of involvement of the Hezbollah leadership or of Syria in the assassination of former Prime Minister of Lebanon, Rafik Hariri. And that situation, extremely important, that point. Let's now take a look at a report regarding the assassination, how it took place, what happened, how it destabilized the region and reshaped Lebanese politics. This report by Ellen Gainsford.
On February the 14th, 2005, a bomb tore through the motorcade of former Prime Minister Rafik Hariri, ripping off the balconies of the surrounding buildings and decimating Beirut's waterfront. Hariri died at the scene, along with 21 others.
It was a horrendous crime that looked like it belonged to another era.
Suspicion immediately fell on neighboring Syria, a country which Hariri had repeatedly criticized for its interference in Lebanese politics. 50,000 people attended Hariri's funeral in Beirut, in an unprecedented outpouring of public anger against Damascus. At the time of his assassination, the Syrian military had been occupying Lebanon for nearly 3 decades. But under international pressure, Syria withdrew its forces 2 months after the attack. Amid concerns about the legitimacy of the Lebanese justice system and the safety of those involved in the trial, a special court was set up to investigate the killing. Based in the Netherlands, the court was created in 2009. Critics say the trial has been overly long, costly too, coming in at over $700 million, with a staff of nearly 400 and 11 full-time judges. Prosecutors focused on the activities of the 4 low-level defendants who remain at large. They're linked to the militant Lebanese Shiite Islamist movement Hezbollah, the group which has denied any involvement in the attack. Opponents of the tribunal criticize its focus on technical evidence and failure to get to the bottom of who ordered the attack and why.
To talk more about the verdict of the Hariri trial and, of course, the situation currently in Beirut, I'm joined by Peter Mohakadeh. Hello, Peter. You're the founder of Base Camp, a civic movement. The movement's also Muwatin Lebnane. Thanks for being with us. First, tell me, how worried are you regarding this verdict? Do you think it might spark tensions with flared-up violence, possibly?
Well, it's very difficult to predict anything when it comes to the security in Lebanon, you know. Like, days evolve on an hour-by-hour basis. And so, you know, with the decision that came out today, I guess there will not be a lot of insecurity, and I'm hoping there will not be additional insecurity in Lebanon.
With the current situation, a crumbling economy, very low purchasing power, of course, this drama, this tragedy with the double explosion at the port, and now the verdict in the Hariri trial. Do you think that Lebanon can remain united? We know there are deep divisions between religious communities, notably between the Shias and the Sunnis.
We have to stay united, and if there's something that the civic society is calling for today, it's unity, and unity through action on the ground. And action can be relief action, and it also has to be resistance. And I'd like to take the opportunity to also pay my condolences to all of the families who have lost loved ones, families who have been themselves hurt, physically hurt, and who have lost almost everything in this tragedy. Some of them who have lost their homes, and they really need us to stand together in unity.
And they need help, and there's also quite a lot of anger. It began also at the end of last year when mass demonstrations in Beirut called for a revolution, called for the removal of all traditional political parties. And those demonstrations resumed following the explosions. For our viewers, can you explain a bit the level of discontent in Lebanon? A lot of people here are blaming the government and endemic corruption for the explosion that took place.
The discontent is simply at its highest level. It's at its peak. It cannot get further than that. It cannot get more than that. I mean, what do you expect us? The capital of Lebanon has been blown apart. What kind of response are we still waiting for? The people of Lebanon, and thank you to the international viewers who are watching us today and who are providing us their help, their support, and their attention. We need help. The people of Lebanon is begging you for help. We're held hostage by this regime. We're held hostage by the people who are still in power, this corrupt class that keeps, that's just unaccountable.
Before we talk more about the situation, of course, let's take a look at those last 2 weeks. After the explosion, what happened? The world leaders coming to Beirut to show their support, and also the very difficult situation for many people here in Lebanon. Many people, 300,000 people with no homes left. Look at this report by Catherine Viet.
August 4th, twin blast rocked the port of Beirut, leveling the area and leaving a massive crater approximately 140 meters wide. The explosion shockwave blew out windows across the city and was felt as far away as Cyprus. The culprit, 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate that had been unsafely stored at one of the port's warehouses. With nearly 200 dead, more than 6,000 injured, and 300,000 homeless, it's the most destructive blast in Lebanon's history. In the aftermath, rescuers combed through the rubble looking for survivors, while volunteers came together to help organize cleanup efforts. All the while, public fury mounting over the government's slow response. As Lebanese officials promised a transparent internal investigation, French President Emmanuel Macron flew to Beirut 2 days after the blast. He toured the devastated port and talked to people in the street in a visit meant to express solidarity with the Lebanese. Meanwhile, documents surfaced showing that officials knew about the dangers posed going back several years, once again igniting anti-government protests. Targets included the Foreign Ministry building and Parliament, as protesters accused their leaders of corruption and mismanagement. Several days of demonstrations brought clashes with riot police. The mounting public pressure forcing the resignation of Prime Minister Hassan Diab's government on August 10th, but Diab and his ministers have stayed on in a caretaker capacity. The Lebanese President Michel Aoun has said the probe into the blast is very complex and won't be concluded quickly. He's ruled out the possibility of an international investigation, but has welcomed help from the FBI and French agents. In the meantime, several dozen countries have pledged more than 250 million euros to help rebuild Beirut, with the aid meant to bypass the government and instead be delivered directly to trusted local charities.
In these very difficult times in Beirut, clearly we see bravery, courage and solidarity from the Lebanese people. The Lebanese, it seems, are taking matters into their own hands. And is that maybe because the government is failing to provide?
They've totally failed. Simply, they've totally failed us. I mean, when the disaster happened, which is like the second largest tragedy in the history of humankind after Hiroshima, there was no response whatsoever from the government. And it's the civic society who had to take onto the streets. Before they were able to mend their own wounds, they were there the first, and they were trying to help people who were more hurt than themselves. And that's how it happened. And really, by the second day, you had more and more movements taking place in the streets, volunteers with brooms and gloves and helmets who were, piling through the rubble and trying to provide all sort of reliefs to the most affected people in the most affected neighborhoods of Beirut. And that's how this initiative started. I'm part of a movement called Muwatin Lebnani, and along with other civic movements such as Baytna Baytak, Embrace Lebanon for psychological relief, and Mintashrin, we formed together a coalition in a space that we call the base camp. And this base camp, we wanted to have a location that was going to be a central location that gives access to all of the volunteers to provide them with the proper intelligence, the proper eyes on what was happening in terms of disaster on the ground.
And explain a bit more how the relief efforts are taking place. I know you are very organized. You've got different branches, everybody's got their role, and is proving effective on the ground.
So we have three different types of reliefs. The first is medical relief, so for the people who were the wounded at the beginning, making sure that their wounds were being cleaned, they were taken to the hospitals, and they were being cared for. And a lot of very elderly people in some of the remote neighborhoods that needed to be taken care of. That's one. The second is food relief, and that's growing right now because people do not have access to water, they don't have access to food. And the third one is shelter relief, so a lot of people have lost their homes, and we need to make sure that these households, these families had access to a temporary home. And for those who had no windows anymore and no doors anymore, we just make sure that we were able to provide them with a front door and windows. So that's how the relief started. And then we started mapping Beirut into different neighborhoods, sending scouts to those regions, making sure that the mapping was all put and systemized. And we started collaborating with other NGOs to make sure that there's a proper collaboration and also a proper division of tasks between us and other NGOs on the ground to make sure that we're able to achieve the largest possible scale and impact.
And the challenges are immense. Many infrastructures here partially or completely destroyed. Half of the hospitals here in Beirut can't function anymore because of the explosion. And of course, there's also a surge in COVID-19 cases. And then you've got the schools that can't open for the children, of course. Very difficult situation for the children. And the head of UNESCO, the international organization, is in Beirut. We met with him and we asked him, what is UNESCO doing for these children? Take a listen.
So UNICEF is appealing for $46.3 million to support the children that were affected. 100,000 directly affected, 600,000 indirectly affected. With these funds, we want to continue the response we started on day one. With support to immunization, we've already bought in tetanus vaccines. With support to water and sanitation, the basic infrastructure is okay, but we need to reconnect to the buildings. With support to psychosocial care, providing the counseling, providing the play that can make children feel normal again. And then in September, providing support to blended learning, to education in an appropriate form in the age of coronavirus, because a child needs to get a sense that there is a future, and part of that future is learning.
International aid on the way, of course. International leaders expressing condolences. The French President Emmanuel Macron, the first one to arrive here in Beirut following the explosion. A lot of foreign powers want to help. You also have Iran expressing support, the Iranian foreign minister who visited Beirut. The international aid is on its way. Maybe a bit too late, some could say. I'd like to know what your point of view is. You're from the civil society. How do you want international relief, international aid to be handed out? How do you want it to be organized? Do you want it to go through authorities or not?
Well, let's start by that. The simple answer and the easy answer is no. no way it does not go through the government, simply because we have no trust whatsoever in the government right now. It has to go through the civic movement, it has to go through the NGOs, and these are the channels that need to be organized and formed into coalitions. They need to be neutral, and they need to be managed by probably a consulting team and a steering committee that's completely independent, with a fund at the top, a Lebanese relief fund, where all of the money will be pooled in from the Lebanese diaspora, for the internationals, from all sort of help that is coming to provide relief to Lebanon, and then a steering committee made of international and independent consultants will then decide what needs to go where in the most efficient way to be able to affect the biggest impact in Lebanon, but definitely not through the official channels of the government.
Peter Mouakadeh, thank you very much. Founder of Muwatine Lebanese civic movement organization trying to bring help, much needed help, to those on the ground, those who've suffered from the double explosion here at the port. That's the end of this special news bulletin from Beirut, Lebanon. Stay with France 24 for more reports and more international news.